I want to thank everybody for coming out on this beautiful January night to celebrate design and history and the future of design with us here at Cooper-Hewitt National Design Museum. I'm Ellen Lupton. I'm Curator of Contemporary Design here at the museum, and I'm very excited to be the moderator for tonight's program. This program was organized in relation to our exhibition Piranesi as Designer, which explores the astonishing design legacy of that great 18th century architect, draftsman, and visionary. The exhibition closes this Sunday, so please be sure to see it while you can. Piranesi boldly combined historical elements to create innovative designs that still resonate today. Tonight, Cooper-Hewitt has assembled a panel of designers who, like Piranesi, make imaginative and often irreverent, humorous, and fantastic use of historical motifs. This wonderful mix of artists will talk about how they use and celebrate history in their work. And what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to begin by briefly introducing each of our panelists, showing you a few examples of their work, and then we'll have a conversation up here on the stage about what they do and how and why they do it. Diamond Baratta began with the partnership of William Diamond and Anthony Baratta. Diamond founded his interior design firm in 1974, and Baratta joined him 25 years ago. The focus of their firm is architectural interior design and decoration. With over 25 magazine covers featuring their work, they've been widely published in shelter publications, including House Beautiful, Architectural Digest, Elle Decor, House and Garden, The World of Interiors, the New York Times Magazine, and many, many other publications. They have been heralded as decorating's dynamic duo. So Batman and Robin, step aside. This is the real deal. They're best known for mixing a diversity of historical styles on a grand scale, a very, very grand scale. They use many historic influences in their work, which you will see in these slides, and they can talk about more shortly. They have created signature collections with Lee Joffa and Stark Carpet, two of the most influential companies in the interior design world. So after creating couture interiors for their own clients, they're delighted now to see their designs enjoyed in homes across the globe. In 2003, Diamond Baratta was featured in our very own National Design Triennial here at Cooper-Hewitt. So it's very great fun for me to welcome them back to the museum to hear what they've been doing since then. Jessica Smith is an artist and designer who lives and works in Savannah, Georgia. Her creative work explores the social and political role of decorative pattern in Western culture. So the textiles shown here appear at first glance to be charming and traditional patterns, but look close and you will see images of conflict, confrontation, and anachronism, all forms of energy that were beloved by Piranesi. So the animals there are fighting, not frolicking, and the men are hauling military tanks on their shoulders. In her studio, Smith produces a limited edition line of home textiles called Domestic Element. Her patterns merge historical motifs with contemporary references. Her work has been widely published, including in the New York Times, GQ, the Times London, ID Magazine, American Craft, and O Magazine. And here at Cooper-Hewitt, we were very proud to feature her in the 2006 National Design Triennial. As an artist, she creates subtly subversive installations merging digital technology with handcraft. So zoom in close on history here, and you see layers of imagery and technique combined on a single surface. Her work has been exhibited in museums across the country, including the Atlanta Museum of Design, Walker Art Center's new Worlds Away New Suburban Landscapes exhibition that's just opened in Minneapolis, And of course, you saw it first here at Cooper-Hewitt. Anna Swee's collections take you on a creative journey across time and history. She makes hip and exuberant clothes that mix vintage styles with her current cultural obsessions, which are many. Whether her inspiration is Victorian cowboys, Warhol superstars, or finished textile prints, her depth of cultural knowledge is always apparent in what she does. As a young girl growing up in the suburbs of Detroit, she dreamed of becoming a success in New York City, and boy, did she ever do it. Today, Anna Sui has 32 boutiques in 5 countries, and her collection is sold in 300 stores in over 30 countries. She's always mixed a serious approach to learning her craft with new and eccentric ideas. After 2 years at Parsons School of Design, and I think we have a lot of Parsons people here in the audience, so it's all worth it. Just stick it out. It's all worth it. Anna styled with her friend Stephen Meisel and designed for several sportswear companies before launching her first collection in 1980. Anna Swee's business continued to grow throughout the 1980s, and in 1991, she premiered her first runway show. The following year, she opened her first flagship store in Green Street in Soho. Fabrics and prints, as well as cut and drape, play a huge role in her work. And I think something we'll see unifying our panelists is that fascination with print and what prints mean and what they convey. When you all were walking in, we were showing a DVD from the spring 2008 collection. These images are from spring 2007. So thank you very much, and I'd like to welcome our panelists up to the stage. So I'd like to start the conversation by asking each of you in turn to talk a little bit about history and how you use history in your work. Here we are in a museum, and museums collect stuff. We collect a lot of stuff when it's being made, and so later it becomes history. And of course, our collection spans thousands and thousands of years of history anyway. So we'd love to hear about how you use history in your work and what it means to you.
Well, for me, I think I have the best job in the world because I can use anything that I'm really obsessed with in my work. I just have to find some sort of thread that links it all together. And as you could see in the spring collection that I did, I was spending a lot of time with my parents watching old movies. And I really was fascinated by the Busby Berkeley films and the chorus girls and how stylish they were, because it kind of coincided with the way a lot of my nieces and a lot of the young ladies have been dressing with shorts. So I kind of did everything around the tap short. Thrown in there, though, are other obsessions like Art Deco. I love the way black and white film looks. I played a lot with like the way colors and textiles twinkle against the lighting. So it's always those sort of things that I'm experimenting with while I'm learning. And I think that's really the process that I use every time I do a collection, is that it's my continuing education.
Great.
I think for me, in my responsibility to Diamond and Baratta, I do a lot of the architecture. So first off, I have to think about how the architecture, the project's going to start and how it's going to form. So I have a huge reference library, and over the years, I've come to know that library pretty well. And so I sit down, as I did today, and with a project that I'm just starting, and I look at my books, and I sort of get to know the concept and the ideas of what I'm going to come up for each room. And the only thing is, I have to say this: you look and look and look at your books all and study them, and I know the room, these historic rooms, and Bill knows too. As decorators all do, there are all these famous rooms that everybody refers to. you can only look so much. That won't help you put a room together or won't help you do architecture. You have to sort of put the books down and take a pencil to paper and just draw. And that's how you get architecture. And that's what I do. So that's how I get historic references.
And the question is how
do you use history in your work? I mean, looking at the slides, you're looking at American colonial, you're looking at, Italian.
Okay, I'm fine.
But we're in the 21st century, like the colonial era is over.
Absolutely.
So what's up with that? And why does that keep coming back? Why?
Well, first of all, Tony said, for us, we're actually, we're called to do projects, and I guess you get the career that you get in your life, and you don't just create your career. You actually, it evolves into what it evolves into. You're not in control in the world. It would be nice if you were. And I think that I would probably love if somebody came to us and said, could you build us, a glass pavilion? But that doesn't happen for us. And what we do, people come to us. I'm thinking actually of a project that you can all see. You've probably seen The Devil Wears Prada, and you can definitely see it on HBO for God knows how many years to come. And we did the home that is Meryl Streep's home in The Devil Wears Prada. And if you look at the interiors there, it's a 6-story townhouse, and we gutted it. We did it from bottom to top, and but the client wanted the architecture to be very historical, and yet they wanted the interiors to be very young and very modern. And so we did. That's exactly what we did, because we have found over years that it's sort of exciting to actually listen to your clients and give them what they want, because when you actually do that, your work expands enormously. If you actually listen to people and give them what they want. So what I'm trying to say is that they asked for backgrounds that were very traditional, because the client said, look, we're going to spend a fortune of money, and we don't want to change our minds about the backgrounds. So if we go classical on the backgrounds, and you do traditional architecture for us, then even, 15 years from now, if we change our minds, we'll have traditional backgrounds. And then we used very, playful, modern fabrics and furniture, and I think it was a really, terrific project. So in architecture, we do a lot of historical work. When we're designing rugs and textiles, and I'm sure Anna goes through this, I mean, basically everything has been designed on this planet. I mean, basically, we're talking about thousands of years of design for human beings. And so what we do is we go back, and Tony and I are doing this for quite a few years together. And so we go back to patterns that existed, and we try and figure out how to either juxtapose them or change their scale or recolor them or reinvent them in a new way. But we're like Piranesi. I mean, we're always he was working with classical Roman architecture. And he then had his spin on it. I mean, that's sort of what we do when we're doing whatever we're doing. We're working with history and trying to reinvent it.
Thanks.
Well,
I could go here, which is exactly what I do. And actually,
but you do it in a very different way.
Yes, I do it in a very different way.
Tell us about that different way.
So mine came from a love of history and a love of story, and a love of pattern and the history of pattern. And it really came from a very sort of academic approach, and the idea that I was looking out there and seeing all of this pattern that was being revisited, and not understanding, let's say, like the toile is the French provincial scene, and not understanding what French frolicking ladies had to do with contemporary suburbia. So for me, the idea of reinventing was to contemporize, to take these historic pattern models and put them into a contemporary vein. And I try to follow, actually, what sort of the models were originally. You know, if a toile was provincial, then I used suburbia. If a medallion pattern was emblematic and of national significance, then I use American Eagles and SUVs, and and the Hamza, the one that was here at the Cooper-Hewitt, and that is the Adventures of Hamza, and it actually comes from this incredibly beautiful manuscript collection that was commissioned in the 16th century, and it was war elephants that they were holding, and so to me, what was the contemporary war elephant was our tank, and what is the contemporary sea monster is the Apache helicopter. So really translating these ideas and looking and researching into the history of these patterns and what they meant at the time that they were produced, and then thinking about what the contemporary significance of them are today.
Great, thank you. So I was struck by what Bill said about working with clients and learning from them. And I would say that, you know, Anna, you don't have clients, you have a public, a consumer public. Mm-hmm. You probably do special dresses for special people too.
Not so often. Mostly it's a consumer that I'm answering to.
So you create something and imagine what the response will be. And Jessica, that's really how you work too. I'm curious from Bill and Tony to hear about a time when you said no to a client. Like you had an image that
we actually have a client in the audience here that how many years ago, I can't even imagine, what year did we do that? 1980, 1979? 81, we finished it. Started, oh, okay. Started in 81. Sorry. We have a client here that we started a project in 81.
And he's still working on it. Well,
we've done another project for
that.
We've actually done 2 more projects. When I first started, and when Tony and I first started, we actually, it's so interesting to me now because I'm working with a client that we're on our like 12th home with this particular client, and 12 homes ago when I started with her, she said to me, well, you're going to present me with a lot of choices, and I'm going to look at the choices and I'm going to see what direction I want to go. And I said to her, don't be ridiculous. I'm not going to present you with any choices. I've listened to what you want, and I'm going to design this project because I'm the designer, and I'm going to present it to you. And that's what I did. I mean, that's how I used to work. And Tony now says to me, I want you all to know, at times he says to me, you're such a wuss. What happened to you? You used to tell the client what to do and how to do it. The world has changed. You know, a lot of young people out in this audience, the world has changed.
And if you want to make a living, which is true, and we're headed for a recession. And I'm not kidding. You got to listen to what people are asking for, and it's true. And sometimes they actually have a good idea.
Most times they do.
And it's a whole different world out there today. Everybody watches TV and reads magazines. It's a really, really savvy market out there. And so there's a lot of websites that they go on, You can't get away with anything, by the way, because your client's online 2 minutes later looking at things, looking at the outdoor furniture that you're suggesting 5 minutes previously. They're actually looking at the outdoor furniture. So you're really, really gotta. It's completely. I'm going on a completely different thing. What he was talking about is he used to have. He is an artist. He was a painting major at Carnegie Mellon. And he came into the world thinking, I'm going to be the artist decorator. And that at some point changed, because the reality is you got to make a living.
I can tell you what the change was, and it's very interesting. I really think the change was Martha Stewart.
Wow, in terms of educating the audience.
The change was that Martha Stewart got out there and she told everybody, you can do it yourself. And if you can't do it yourself, you can educate yourself enough to know what you like and what you don't like. And now we live in a world where everyone thinks that they have to know what they want, know what they like, know what they think is sophisticated or beautiful. The world has changed. So if you think that you're going to go out there now, I mean, it's fascinating because I actually sit there with clients now and I show them, well, you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do this. And they direct me, or us. And it's actually a good thing. We're not defensive anymore. We're actually listening to people, and every person comes in with sort of something different that they want. And for us, it has so expanded what we do. And so we're like ever learning because of it. I'm talking too much.
I think that the interesting part of that, can I?
Yeah.
So I think that the interesting part about that is
telling me to shut up.
The idea where you asked originally, like, we're not in the colonial times anymore. But why is it that we're revisiting colonial times again? I mean, that's what's so interesting about this use of history and so that the idea that clients know what they want, but do they know what they want because of what they're aspiring to, what they're thinking about in the political world, the social world, the global market, and sort of how that history is used and what they look towards. I find it fascinating, actually. I mean, that's where my process begins, is why did we like toiles 5 years ago? Like, what about what we're doing in the world now made toiles come back 10 years ago? But they're still hanging out. And why? I mean, there's these sort of innocuous little ditty patterns, right? But so that idea that how that the use, like I love looking at the scene that you have where it has almost the Amish rug, and that idea of sort of going back to revisit the craft and where does that come from in this market where everything's made somewhere we have never visited. So I think that that's a really interesting part about the client.
I have a whole theory about this whole preoccupation with nostalgia that I think this whole generation has had for a long time now. I think the world is so harsh at this point. It's so scary. It's in your face. You see war every time you turn the TV on. You see just the scariest things you could ever imagine and beyond what you could imagine. We're all retreating somewhere to something that we're comfortable with. And I think that's where we all find beauty in the past. Mm-hmm. The craftsmanship. It's like when people really use their hands to make something. To me, there's nothing more beautiful. Like, that's why I love the flea market. It's more that I can see that someone's touched something. It's not just something that's manufactured and hammered out with no heart and soul behind it. And I think, again, that's what we all love, is that craftsmanship. And the comfort of knowing the history behind it, again, is something that we retreat to each time, because it was something that was established, that was beautiful. And why can't we make it beautiful again with modern technology, modern materials? And for me, like, the body has changed too. You can't go back to the silhouettes from the 60s because people don't have those bodies anymore. You can't go back to the 20s. It's just like, it's always going to modernize because the body and the materials have changed.
Great. Jessica, when I look at your work, I see something that is not about retreating into comfort, but that gives the initial illusion that it will make me comfortable, but then it has this shock. Do people want to live with that?
Some.
Thankfully, right?
Thankfully. And then some of us, listen to clients or teach, which is my path right now. But yeah, I mean, no, some people do want to live with it. I mean, my idea for the collection that when I originally started it was actually an installation. And so it was not started as a commercial product. And then people were asking actually for it, like where could they find these elements? And I said, well, you could find them in my studio. So I started putting them out in the world. I was actually quite surprised because I thought nobody would want to live with this. But I do think that we're at a time where people are, if given that history, people are interested in, I mean, everybody is looking at everything, multimedia, we have people, the people that read the New York Times online now is probably such a wider range of people that ever read the New York Times before. And so I think that people do want that, to have that conversation. And so I think of my patterns as a place for somebody else to have a conversation when they become theirs. So not only is it, so if somebody chooses my pattern for their space, then it's a place that they can start the conversation that they can take it on. And, but there is the shock value that's part of it, the subversity.
A new generation is looking for that discomfort or twist. And I think, your point about Martha Stewart is excellent. I think Martha Stewart helped to educate people about design and raise the awareness of it. And now, the children of Martha Stewart are shopping for home goods, and even a store like Urban Outfitters, which has an entire home furnishing section, and you can buy, embroidery kits with pictures of people engaged in sexual acts, but you embroider it, you make it by hand, and it's a very sensual experience, as it should be. But there's, I think now a desire to infuse the domestic space with that kind of personality, and to make it reflect our unsettled times, and not simply the comfort and the beauty of craft, but also the disturbing side of it.
It's interesting to have this conversation with the Piranesi exhibit up, because actually that period during neoclassical, and that idea of what was happening with the French Revolution and everything that came about after that is very, to me, there's a parallel to maybe what the world is going through in some ways, as an unsettled time globally, because that was an unsettled time globally as well. So I think it's interesting that we're revisiting that. We do seem to be revisiting that period specifically in many ways during that. So,
and libertinism too, from the 18th century. Anna, there's been a lot of attention in the press about pirating of couture clothes, and some designers, including yourself, are taking action and trying to stop this through a big lawsuit. Here's an example of, copying, right? And people doing it claim that what they're doing is original enough and democratic in spirit, and you and some other designers are trying to protect the, value of what you do. And can you tell us a little bit about the lawsuit?
I think the nature of the garment business is really, it's inspired by one thing and it filters down. So copying has been kind of what most of the market does. But in this case, there are specific laws that protect prints. It's our copyright laws. And we have copyrights.
So specifically the textile.
The textile print or pattern. And I had no choice but to take action, because in this season, there were 26 of my prints copied. Wow. So it's not like it was...
and the knockoffs are getting to the market before the originals.
In some cases, right? Yeah. They had them in the stores before we were even producing it. And part of it is the internet that's just giving out all the information. But again, we were used to people copying off the internet, but you could notice a certain distortion going on because they would only see it from one flat view. This was not that case either, where somehow they really saw the garments and details and the textiles and everything. So it was beyond knockoff.
Mm-hmm.
We've had the same problem, by the way. I mean, we've actually been like on a magazine cover, and then we did a line of fabrics for Lee Joe for our first line of fabrics, and they said, well, you can't do that fabric that you had on the cover of the magazine because Brunswick knocked it off already. I mean, so another fabric house had already sort of done our design, so we couldn't do it. And we don't really, there's nothing to really protect us.
Mm-hmm. But you can copyright prints.
Yes.
But can you copyright big houndstooth?
No.
Like,
there's some things that are just...
After, for some odd reason, we had done a big houndstooth that had been published in the New York Times many, many years ago. And I think it was done, it must have been done 10 years ago. It was the first time I had ever seen a giant houndstooth that was woven for us. And
hand-woven by
hand-woven.
Right. We asked her to do it.
I swear Bill invented it. It was a huge scale houndstooth. Meanwhile, the world has embraced it. And somebody said to us recently, "You don't think you invented giant houndstooth, do you?" Meanwhile, I know that Bill did it in my heart. It was never done at that scale.
Do you believe that's an idea that should be protected?
You can't protect something like that.
It is amazing that, you can work really, really hard and you can invent things and then it's just poof, it's just gone.
Because maybe there was a giant houndstooth that was done in the 30s that was, that he happened to see in a movie, that
Dorothy Draper.
No, she didn't use it.
No one had done it, and it's fine. And it was so used. It became this huge thing. I mean, that everyone did, and it filtered down to towels at Target.
Right.
It filtered down to everything.
It's in fashion. It's on rugs. It's everywhere. But that's life.
So I mean. Part of this problem with pirating is related to the internet and to the ease with which information is shared, but also computer technology for making patterns based on photographs and so forth. There's also a whole, cultural movement to create, more freedom of ideas, right? And so there are people, on the radical side of, copy left, that believe that all ideas should be free. And then there are designers and artists and authors and music producers and so forth that want to protect some of that. I'd like to address this to Jessica because you're someone that very deliberately borrows from history and in some cases collages elements that you didn't draw. In other cases, you do all the drawing. I'm interested to know what your process is in terms of pulling those sources together and how you feel about the collective ownership of historical imagery.
Right. So actually, you showed one of my few collage pieces, and I actually stopped doing those when I started thinking about sort of that's a legitimate because it's past a date and there's a historical context for it.
So it's legal.
So it's legal, but and I think it's legitimate because it also is so obviously an element that is not mine. I mean, I have a very sort of hand that is not a fine Piranesi engraving hand, but the idea that that was part of that intention of that pattern is that there's a juxtaposition between something that's historical and something that's contemporary, and that you sort of get the information real quick from that. So one of the reasons I stopped using actual document text models was because I wanted that information to come a little slower, that you had to read a little bit more. But the borrowing from history, I mean, that's a fascination that I have just in the idea of provenance of patterns and the fact that, you can go to Africa and you can see African screen printed textiles that look like Indonesian batiks, but using African colors, but were made in England.
Mm-hmm.
right, for the market. Or what we think of as African beadwork, a lot of that beadwork was traded actually in a much later period. So I think that there is a place to borrow from history. But again, I emphasize that place is when you're really thinking about the historical context, like the huge houndstooth. What does the houndstooth mean, and why would you blow it up, and what's the context for it? That's very different than borrowing a pattern that is just put into a collection that's out there. That's not borrowing. That's
and clearly the motivations are completely
different. But I think that we borrow from history. I mean, we borrow from history when we write, in our movies, and I mean, that's what we do. So I do it very directly because I like to reference that period, and I think that's a very clear way to reference it. Just say, this is what, and I hope that starts a conversation about history. Actually, that's what I enjoy, is that what was going on then and what's going on now, and what do we know from it? Maybe what can we learn from it? And
I once read a quote from David Hicks, the great English decorator, that he got all of his patterns from the Grammar of Ornament, which is the famous pattern book, which we use extensively at our office for pattern ideas, and I recommend it to everybody, by the way. And if you look in the Grammar of Ornament, every David Hicks pattern, which are all the rage now, are in the Grammar of Ornament. He did not come up with any of his patterns except the ones with the letter, with the intertwined letters and that kind of thing. But all of the geometric patterns are from the Grammar of Ornament. And he states it clearly that that's where he got all of his concepts up from. There, he got his historical he used historical references for his patterns.
But then he colored them.
And he blew them up in
scale, and he made them his.
And made them contemporary.
And he made them contemporary.
Exactly.
And the Grammar of Ornament was itself a copy. It was a very scientific, rigorous study of patterns that had been created all over the world. And the author analyzed them and looked at the math and the geometry and assembled it in a systematic way so that people like you could do what you do.
Exactly.
That was the purpose, and it's
you
interesting.
Now in your book, in your bookstore here, you have all those new books out of pattern.
Right now, they all come with Illustrator files.
Exactly.
They come with a DVD, so you don't even have to do the artwork for it. It's done for you.
Right.
I know, it's even vectorized. It's not. Yeah, that's what you're right.
Right. It's all there.
But it's interesting because Document Textiles. I was actually, before I came here, I was at Print Source, which is a print convention, trade show right now, and there's tons of booths of Document Textiles, and they're just gorgeous. I just want.
So what are Document Textiles?
They are old textiles that people buy, actually, even
like in little pieces, or
little pieces. Sometimes now vintage. A lot of them are coming from the '60s, even, and further. I mean, there's some beautiful pieces that are Liberty prints from the arts and craft era, and even further beyond Victorian. And you buy a remnant, and then it's yours to use. So if it's a Liberty print, it's not yours to use, but it's yours to use. And then those are inspirations for designers. And
you can go way further than that.
Yours to use,
right?
I mean, because I do that too. Like I buy engravings of apples or whatever. That I think all designers today are looking for stuff that it's okay to use, because we're very afraid of making a mistake. And you can't just use anything. And so finding these old things that don't belong to anybody is a great thing, right? But it's an interesting
Well, it's also
issue,
a different process now, because there aren't the art studios and design studios available anymore, like especially for textile prints, where every print company used to have a whole team of artists, and you would say, okay, I want a floral cabbage rose. And they would have the studio paint them for you. It doesn't exist anymore.
Absolutely.
It's in the last...
It does at Lee Joffa. I mean, it's sort of like amazing because, they actually have people that actually still paint, like we conceptualize a pattern and they say, well, what artist should we hire to do the, and it's fascinating. So they still do it the way that they used to do it in a big residential fabric house like that.
But in the garment center, it's like you don't find that at all anymore. So when I did start, there was that facility, but not anymore.
So Anna, tell us about the textile on your dress and what it means and what its origin is and how it came into the world.
This is part of the collection of the last two images that you saw. The collection was inspired by interiors, especially the Eameses and Alexander Gerard. So there was a specific period that I was trying to capture. This particular print came from a swatch. Probably it was a curtain at one time. And a lot of my prints were inspired by interior textiles. And what I wanted was to work much more architecturally rather than, like, I think I'm known for florals and ruffles. And this collection, there were no ruffles and no florals. So that's
you wear it very well.
Thank you.
I wanted to say that Tony and I are now inspired by 20th century art. And so we've actually been taking artists' work and turning it into like repetitive patterns.
And how do they feel about that?
Well, so far we haven't had any problems. I mean,
so far we haven't been sued. But when Frank Stella actually sees the work, he's not going to be very happy about it.
Well, didn't he invent stripes?
So, well, there you go. It's interesting. We've taken his early protractor paintings, but instead of using them, he did them as a single image, and we take it and make it a pattern, and we repeat it, 12 times in a rug.
So you got to
recolor it, and nothing's happened yet. I mean,
you have to ask the question: is it really his work then? If you look at
I hope not.
No, but because you're inspired by his paintings. It's not his coloration, and it's not his paintings anymore because it's not its pattern anymore.
But we're very, very inspired by a zillion painters, and that's where a lot of our textiles and a lot of our fabrics and a lot of our rugs are coming from now. But we're sort of making them ours. We hope.
Well,
so
this isn't new. I mean, the way we're all designing is as old as old. I mean, the idea that like the Silk Road followed things, the chinoiserie ended up in Europe along this traveling road, and along the way it picked up some Middle Persian motifs, and then it landed in France, and it had some French parasols in it. I mean, so that this is an old way of working, and I think that it's just with media now. And the idea that it is so easy to see things on the internet, and that we lose that maybe people lose a sense of this history, not only drawing from history, but the history of having it transition. One of the places that I looked at today, the document textiles. I mean, she had this incredible collection. It was a woman who was a designer for years and just had been collecting textiles, but it was fabulous to see from these old Japanese kimonos and Indonesian batiks where it ended up at Liberty Prints. And you could see just in this one booth that was very small, this history of what we're talking about right here, of having done it by hand. So now it's just quicker to do.
Well, I think what's interesting now is that the technology has made it even easier to have that Silk Road, spinning like some giant highway. But it's also made us more worried. And I think, there's a lot of anxiety about how do you really make it your own, and how do you copy in a legitimate way? How do you merge and collage and pastiche in a way that is legal and also authentic to yourself? Partly because it's become so much easier. We're much more worried about it now than people worried about it in the 60s, or certainly in the 16th century.
We may be going off into a funny tangent, but very quickly, Tony and I designed a huge line of rugs, and they were so tongue-in-cheek, and they were so us. They couldn't be more us, if you, they just were our signature. And we had a manufacturer make them for us. And then years later, we sold them to Stark Carpet as our designs. And then the people that made them for us sued us and said, we did those designs. And we were like, what are you talking about? Anyhow, I just want you to know the courts are not set up so they actually get half the money on everything that we did in those years, even though they had nothing to do with designing them. All they did was execute the designs for us. So, but I think we're going on a funny tangent, but I just want you to know, be careful in this world, because it is not an easy world. I think it's
people
steal.
All designers
people
are
steal.
worried about.
It is.
People steal left and right, and it's part of the world.
It's not set up for the designer. You're not going to win in court at all. So,
well, partly because there's so much confusion about what is
well,
original.
and we don't think in a legal way. Yes. We don't cover our bases in legality, and that's sort of the way you have to be now. Mm-hmm. So you sort of need a legal department to everything. You need a legal department, and you need a legal department. And
sea monsters are not a dime. They're a dime a dozen.
I'd like to see what people from the audience might like to learn from all of you. Any questions from the audience about process, about motif, about back there.
When you were describing your relationship with Stark and designing the rugs for them, did you have a licensing agreement with them?
Yes, we did. But are you talking about the ones where we had the problem, or are you talking about the later ones? The ones we had the problem is that Tony and I worked with a company exclusively, and we had them make 35 rugs for us. And then we sold the designs, 35 unique rugs that look like no one else but Diamond and Baratta. They have our signature all over them. Our scale, our kind of pattern, our kind of color. And as soon as we sold them to Stark, we were sued by the company that manufactured them, who said that they designed them. And that's what happened.
If you had a licensing agreement with Stark, that's not selling them. That's renting your property, your original design that you copyrighted.
Correct. But the other company said that they designed them, and there's really no way to. I mean, we showed where our inspiration came from in court. Right. We showed everything. We showed letters back and forth how we rejected what the company that manufactured, like zillions of times, we were like, no, that's not what we want. This is what we want.
I mean, they were your subcontractor.
We still lost. So because their name was on the drawing. So
was it a court trial or was it an arbitration?
It ended up being an arbitration because we couldn't afford to keep going and going and going. And that's big companies against little people are where you have your problem in life. I mean, if money wasn't an object for us, we probably would have won in the end, but we couldn't go there. So, anyhow.
Good. Yes, Ward.
Hi. I was wondering, I was thinking of directing this to Anna Sui and possibly others. Years ago, designers and fashion designers used to use museum collections, and they used to go to the Brooklyn Museum, or they'd go to FIT, and they'd look through the costumes, their collections, and be inspired. And I was wondering if that still goes on, if you ever do it, if you have colleagues who have or do, and if the other designers in the audience can talk about that and what it's like when you do that.
That's one of my favorite things to do, is to look at how things were made. Because it just opens up your mind to another way of doing things. It requires a lot of time to do that. And right now, the way a global business runs, there's not really the time to take an afternoon to go to the museum. I think a lot of the design team that I have right now does their research on the internet, which, again, to me is not my favorite way. Like, I loved going to the library. I loved going to look at collections of clothing. I loved going to the museum to do research. But I just think research is so important, and learning about different processes, different ways of executing something is so important. So I wish people would take advantage of those facilities because they're all out there. But I don't know how many people really use them that much anymore.
It's an interesting thing because I have always been fascinated with like Karl Lagerfeld taking on Chanel. I feel like he's the luckiest person in the world because I have a fantasy that Tony and I would have loved to have taken on Parrish Hadley when they went out of business, because he actually has this huge library and this whole vocabulary, and then he can create from there. And I think he's one of the most brilliant designers. I mean, I don't know how all of you feel about him, but I think he's brilliant. And so, you know, for us, that would be like the greatest fantasy. I don't know if you've heard of Parrish Hadley, but Sister Parrish and Albert Hadley were great designers, and they sort of had this design concepts that they came up with. And we would love to sort of like, you know, be Diamond Baratta for Parrish Hadley, like he is for Chanel. So, I mean, I think
to absorb that vocabulary,
absorb it, and then go from there.
Authentically absorb.
Start there, and then do what Karl Lagerfeld did. But it's so amazing because he has a place to start from.
I thought that what Anna said was really fascinating about the generation today. I think that in the past, our office took much more time and care about everything that we did. Everything was drawn by hand. Everything was beautifully rendered. It was just incredible that we were very proud of every piece of work that went out of the office. It was a whole different world.
Your clients are here. Be careful.
No, it's not. It's not that. I think that now with a push of a button, a lot of the same work is done today.
But the drawings are not as beautiful. There's
Nothing
no comparison
at all as beautiful.
To hand drafted blueprints versus CAD drawings.
And it's the same attitude that a lot of people have with their work today. And somebody pointed out to me, we're working with another architect on a project that they said their work, it looks like they're designing law offices for people's homes. And it's so true. I mean, these $15 million townhouses that look like law offices. And it's sad. Who wants to live in a law office? That's what these classical neoclassical townhouses. Who cares? It's like without any heart and soul. And the whole thing is, it's all with a pencil to paper. That's the only way that you can ever make any attempt at making anything look real. It doesn't have anything to do with pushing a button on a computer. So,
Jessica, you work a lot.
I started actually my collection based on researching at the Cooper-Hewitt in graduate school, and I wrote a little mini grant and got them to send me to pay for me to fly here and spend a week in the collection. And actually, previous to that, because I come from a fine art painting background, I didn't even know that there were these collections out there that were available. And I teach now, and I am constantly bringing students to libraries, and almost every project that I give has a component of actually looking at physical objects to start from, because one of the things that amazed me the most at looking at this collection of the textiles and the wall coverings was this scale. On the internet, you don't see how large a pattern is.
And there's no detail.
And there's no detail. And you don't see the quality, and you don't see the process, and you don't see the craft, and the difference between an etching and a block print, and when those things started transitioning and without looking at them. So I'm a big advocate of actually physically going to these collections, besides the fact that there's these gorgeous collections out there. And librarians of these collections and holders of the collections are, I say always be the nicest, because they're so great. They're so knowledgeable. I did a whole pattern based on Suburban Garden, all narcotics. And I did it all drawn. It's called The Suburban God of Narcotics, right? And it's all drawn from, actually, the librarian and I was working in a special collections library, and we were looking for when these flowers were first put into books as narcotics. And so I drew from these flowers, and it was interesting because some of them, like the poppy, are very old. And then, like cacao is quite new, actually. And so the books, the quality of drawing and the way that it was illustrated changed. And that you can see in the pattern, actually, because that's what I was drawing from. And so I took a very sort of academic approach, like I'm going to look at when these were first being used as narcotics, and then draw them and put them into a tossed repeat.
And you're drawing them yourself.
Well, absolutely,
right,
from the
not
books.
Scanning them.
No. And that's what's right. And that's what's so amazing is most of these collections won't let you scan them, right? I mean, or copy them. Right. And you sign up like here.
And that's to protect the original or to protect the intellectual property?
I think it's to protect the original, but some of it's to protect, like here, actually, if you want to use images, you sign, I have to sign away, like if I get images from the Cooper-Hewitt, I can only use them for lecture purposes and all of these.
I don't think that the Cooper-Hewitt wants things copied directly.
Talk to me.
but it's the idea, and it's fabulous because here I go into these collections. You can't bring pens. You can only bring a pencil and a sketch pad. I mean, that's all you can have, right?
Same with the clothing collections too. You can only sketch them.
Right, white. You have to have white gloves.
But isn't sketching copying too? I mean, isn't
to me, it's a learning process too, to understand the construction.
Hasn't art always been about looking at things and copying them from nature or from
absolutely
other works of architecture, other paintings, or other patterns? It seems like that this is what we've always done. And is a pencil so different from a camera?
It is, isn't it? I mean, that's what's sort of interesting because it does seem, I mean, this is where you're getting into the issue about like the copying, copyrights and legal things. It's so interesting. It seems that it is because, well, first of all, unless you're a master, right? I mean, there are forgers out there that are fabulous, but most of us aren't that good. So that there's a translation, there's a physical translation that we make from our eye to our hand to the paper that doesn't happen through a scanner. And so those scan things are so easy. And they feel easy often. I mean, I think you can often see.
And it has such a look that Illustrator, what is it? Auto paint. What's that called? I know the
Live Trace.
Live Trace. Like Live Trace is so ugly. You can see it immediately. The kind of blobby thing that happens. It's like it's a dead giveaway, and there's nothing pretty about it, or living for that matter. How about more questions from our audience? Yes.
You mentioned Chanel and Charles and Ray Eames, who I think both of those designers were very new and modern in their time. Do you think there are designers working today that don't use a lot of historical reference, who are really creating something completely new, or is that impossible?
Zero nostalgia, does it exist, Anna?
I think there's designers that claim zero nostalgia.
Right. Is it possible? Can you do that?
I think Geary. I mean, well, I guess it's descended from sculpture, so I guess I mean, I find Geary's work very interesting because it's beautiful, but it's actually sometimes not that well done, so that it's like not perfect. So there may be problems with his buildings because they're so out there, because they're sort of pushing the envelope, and so construction is not constructed. It hasn't been designed for organic forms like that. So it isn't as well executed as more like a more of a cube shaped building. So I think of him as somebody who, but I guess it really goes back to sculptural forms. So it's not new. I mean, it's definitely taken from 20th century sculpture. I don't think it was done in architecture.
But, I think also what you were talking about, there's a craftsmanship involved in making something or building something. So you have to understand the fundamentals beneath it all and behind it all. And I think that that's really what I'm trying to convey to people, is that you have to learn the craft before you can take it beyond. I think that that's what so many painters did. They copied masters over and over and over again to understand the technique, to understand how you paint light and dark. And this is what going to one of these garment collections and sketching it teaches you, is the construction of it, what's behind it, what's underneath it, not just a flat surface. It's not just the picture that you see on the screen on the computer. I think that you can't learn how bias works until you really look at it. You can't understand foundation garments until you see them underneath something and what it does for the outside. You know, there's just so much that you can learn from really looking at things and inspecting them, turning them inside out and drawing them. So the thought process goes through your brain.
I just want to say, and like the body underneath also, if you don't know your anatomy, you're not going to know.
Yeah, that's important too.
It's interesting. I'm just reading this book called Rethinking Decoration, and because I think there's a lack of actually good design discourse about decoration itself in contemporary, talking about contemporary. But one of the premises for this book is actually looking at modernism and deciding whether it really was new. I mean, if we think about some of that work, it was, in their belief, new, like we were talking about Gary or Calatrava. I mean, some of these, they believe they're new, but they did come from a source. It might not have been the furniture source, or it might have been like the Shakers, but looking at that as, so what makes something new? I mean, I don't know if there ever was something.
But it is different, I think, the question there from the audience. It is different to strive to be new than to strive to be old.
Absolutely.
Even if it's being old in a new way. And that, wanting to design a spaceship is different from wanting to design a colonial home or a law office or whatever. And there was a time in history when striving to be new was the most important thing, even if one ended up doing it badly or there were problems with that newness. It was an ambition. It seems like not so important now.
Well,
at least in many areas.
Well, I think that the one thing is that certain people just don't get us. Probably all of us here on the panel. They don't understand that the goal for us is not so much to kill the world with this modernism and try every day to like make a new, like for Anna, a new collection, or Jessica, a brilliant new killer pattern that no one's ever seen before, or for Bill and I to like create like new architecture and new interiors that no one's ever seen. But we want to approach this in a way that we want to take history and sort of like turn it on its ears a little, and to make people think, and sort of put make them sort of edgy a little. And some people get it, some people like it, some people have always understood it, and other people are annoyed by it. To me, it's always been modern. There have always been people that have done this kind of thing and have found this chic and have understood this level of design. But other people get so annoyed by it. Sometimes I read on blogs that that they look at our work and they're so annoyed by it. I shouldn't be reading our blogs. Yeah, I shouldn't be reading blogs. But they read it and they say, how could they design that? How could they design those cabinets? When they really just don't understand that it's just what we're just trying to do is like take the historical references and tweak them a little and make you think about something else, and have a little fun with it. And I don't know, whatever we're doing, we're trying to do it in a different way. And we don't, I don't know, I think all of us are not looking for this to please the magazines, please the rest of the public in that certain way that the rest of the world wants us to be. I don't think that's the attitude here. Now
he's talking about trends.
It's like yes, exactly. Trends. It's a following trend thing, because
we don't do that. I don't think Anna does that. I mean, I don't think Jessica does that.
We don't create them.
In a way, but sometimes
not. You also have to look at what's going on. Like Anna said, she was looking at girls wearing shorts. Well, doesn't everybody? That's so cute. But then you look at what's happening in the world and plan the next move.
Well,
right?
I mean, that's the other thing that's so important, especially with a business like I'm involved in, where it has to reflect the times. It has to be relevant. I can't decide I'm going to put bustles on every dress this season and think that people are going to like it, unless I can figure out a way that it's going to be functional and fit in with the way people are dressing. And that's the thing. I'm not an artist. I'm a designer that makes things for a consumer, and that's, I think, was my choice and what my job is. So I always have to think about my consumer and my customer, and if they're going to buy it.
Mm-hmm. Right. From the audience here, yes?
You all were expressing concern about, not using original sources and getting things off the internet, and even the idea of like mixing things up and combining things. Do you think there's going to be a point where like no one's going to really know what the original source was or care, and things are just going to get further and further away down the road, and what's going to happen? It doesn't seem like a positive kind of
Not if
way.
I'm out there. Not if I'm out there. I hope to always tell people where the sources are. I mean, that to me, that's something that's really sad. I think that the idea of mixing it up.
Point where, museums, it's too expensive, and let's just throw all that old stuff away, and we have all these designs, and you know what I mean?
I don't think that's ever going to happen.
I hope not.
I don't think it's ever going to happen.
All right, good.
It's something you brought up, though, is modern was, sort of a 20th century term, right? I mean, modern was a 20th century term, and so we're now in the 21st century. So modern is way in the past.
Right, like Anna's textile that references Alexander Girard and the Eameses, that's like ancient times.
Ancient, exactly.
Right.
But was Piranesi modern in the 18th century? Was he considered?
He was considered modern in the 18th century.
Yeah, so
use that term even. I believe I'm not the Piranesi scholar, but
right. So in each century, whatever anybody's doing, they're modernists, even though we might not like them. They're modern.
But I think it's still a point of view that I'm not sure that Mitt Romney is modern. That one can be conservative.
Got you.
Being conservative is a point of view. And being about change is another point of view.
But modern,
I don't think everybody's modern just because they're alive at a certain point.
Okay.
Some people are.
It's sort of interesting. At the beginning of the postmodern era, modern was conservative. So in some respects,
right, it was considered old guard, and
and that there was this sort of imposed white box on the world, and we just need to get out there and decorate. Right. But it is sort of interesting, that whole relationship. I mean, we've talked about the grammar of ornament and that sort of notion that actually people were using and looking at and documenting decoration at the time that modernism actually starts to take off, and the reaction to that, that we don't need pattern in our world anymore. We don't need, all the things that we're talking about loving, that we need this new thing, which is what became modernism. But so I think it's interesting that it then became old guard.
Right.
So I think that there's...
Oh, I think we're still stuck there. I think there's a huge world of people still thinking that total simplicity is, now. And, I think that, I mean, it's really getting tired, but it's, but it's there. It's really there. you know what I'm saying.
Well, absolutely. And sometimes I'd like to get rid of all my stuff because there's a lot of stuff out there, right? That's a reaction too. And that's another interesting thing I thought about in this conversation, that we're talking about, there's a lot of stuff out there. So maybe the idea of new is there's a new thought behind it. Like, do we need to keep making new stuff?
No. There's plenty of stuff. More questions? I think we'll take a couple more questions.
We have time for one or two more questions. So I know you'll all raise your hands now. They always do.
Do any of you guys have an opinion on going forward using green technologies, soy inks, maybe for fashion, or any sort of enviro-friendly aspects of your work?
I'm not a big believer in it. I think it's another marketing tool.
I do too.
Solve that one.
I think that soy dyes and stuff like that, there's some research that's being done. I'm interested in it. I think that the element that we don't see, which is something that I actually designed too, is the social, what the patterns say, as well as what the actual physical content is, the whole idea of the ecology of it all. And I am interested in that. I'm interested in it more when we look at it not as a marketing scheme, but as a full sort of, that idea of, do we have too much stuff in the world and how do we work with it in that way? But as far as like the natural-based materials, I'm interested in. I teach, so obviously my students are exploring it, and we talk about it a lot. And the question, and in interior design, it's a huge question. But there's so many things out there that come out that are in the market for like a minute, and then we find out that they're not any better.
Right.
And so I think that there's got to be a lot of research done.
Somebody told me about an upholsterer that was doing all green furniture now, sofas. Now, I thought to myself, I've been thinking about this since they told me about this.
Yesterday.
That was yesterday. I was thinking about changing upholsterers because of this, and I thought, what's the good? What good is that going to be? Sitting on a green sofa.
What they're saying is like all the stuffing materials are biodegradable, or they're not synthetic, or whatever. They're all green. It was certainly interesting. It
is interesting.
But is synthetic green? Is organic?
Right. What is it?
How do we decide?
I don't think synthetic is green. Right?
But recycled polyester. I know.
And cotton is considered environmentally very negative, right, because it's so water intensive in the growing of it, and so it's not just natural materials are good and synthetic. That will be next week. It's a huge, very important, and clients are interested too to, not poison themselves with their furniture.
Oh, absolutely, that's for sure.
So there's a motivator. Mm-hmm. So one more question from the audience. So do I get the last question?
It's all yours, Ellen.
Okay, so my question is to Diamond and Baratta. Can you imagine a situation in which you would use Jessica's fabrics?
Totally. Totally. I thought her fabrics were fabulous. In fact, we were talking before, and, she said that, some guy came up to her who had a collection of antique cars, and he said, could you design a fabric for me? And she said, well, you really should look at my fabrics a little closer. And, and then he did, and he was like, well, I guess not, But I think her fabrics are fabulous because they are coming from a very similar place. I think all of us have a sense of humor in our work, or a commentary in our work, and I think that's sort of the thread that ties all of us together.
I would like to say, I actually have a fantasy about doing like a whole environment with them, though. Like an old toile room, like having you design a fabric just for me. like a real personal.
That's my personal fantasy. Is that if as I go forward, I have a product line, and my personal fantasy has always been that people will individually. I can go into your life and get into your whatever's subversive for you and design. I mean, that would be so much fun for me. And who are you? And where do you come from? And where's your aspirations? And what's your background? And,
well, I like it a little bit on the off side.
Well, absolutely,
the Urban Outfitters.
Well, not on the. I don't know, but it's sort of a private thing. So, and
I'm good with off.
And but I like those very, very over-the-top toile rooms where everything's covered in the same fabric: the bed, the drapes, the ceiling, the wall. Every surface that you can imagine is all done in the same fabric.
I've actually done those as installations.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's everything. But nobody likes to buy all of my because all of my patterns actually talk to each other. So that's the idea, is that they are supposed to all go together.
Oh, really?
Most people don't want them to all go together.
And I have another question this is really my last question, but it's something that Anna was talking about, how bodies have changed. And I'd love to know how they have, scary, and how you are responding to that. I mean, it looked like they were all really skinny in the pictures, but I don't know people that look like that.
Well, those are models.
Those shorts. I know.
But in reality, most people go to the gym. There is a different, like you cannot wear the armholes from the 60s on those little shift dresses because the people were so much skinnier. There's a whole other body type going on.
They were skinnier then.
Yes, because it was pre-gym, and I think the nourishment is different now. I think that we're constantly changing our fit. Waistlines are thicker. Like no one wears a corset or a girdle.
I thought going to the gym was supposed to make me skinny.
But it builds up other areas. So I think that those are the things that you're always conscious of as you're constructing clothes, that you look at some of the old things like the wasp waists from the 50s, and I don't think that there's many people that can really fit in those anymore. I think that was something that was kind of nurtured, where as soon as you started wearing a girdle, you tried to make your waist smaller and smaller and smaller. I don't think that's an objective anymore. I don't think people even consider the waistline a focal point. It's kind of like most young women when they put a skirt on or pantyhose, it's down here. And it's, so that's a big change in how people think of their bodies. So it's constantly changing and evolving.
Fascinating. That's great. Well, thank you all. I thought it was really interesting to hear your point of view. So thank you all for being a great audience.